So today we're going to look at the carbon cycle. So I have up my little ecosystem up here. We have trees, rabbits, water, bacteria, and underground we have our fossil fuels. All right, so this is our cloud hanging out in the atmosphere. Now before we can actually follow where carbon goes, we need to identify the different parts of our ecosystem on large scales. So anything that would be really we would consider the atmosphere, we're going to call it atmosphere. All right, so we're just going to label that. Now remember, we did the prefix for abiotic and biotic, and we know that the term bio means living. So any living thing, we're going to call the biosphere. So the biosphere includes our tree, it includes our bunny rabbit, and it includes the bacteria, and also the little grass over here. All right, so biosphere, remember, meaning life. Now we also have the hydrosphere. Hydro, meaning water. And then down all the way on the bottom, any of the rocky stuff, okay, that is not living, right? If it's living, it's biosphere. But anything that's made of rocks, we're going to call the geosphere. Geo meaning rock or earth, right? So now let's take a look at where does carbon go? So I personally like to always start in the atmosphere. It gives me a starting point, and it always gives me a way to get back, right? We want to make sure that we cycle. So think of a cycle. It starts at one point, and you have to go back to it. So in the atmosphere, we have carbon in the form of carbon dioxide, CO2. Now, the only way to get carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere is for a plant to absorb it. Now, we're going to get into this in a lot more detail in a future unit, but the process of taking in carbon dioxide is called photosynthesis. Right? And as a result of photosynthesis, we make what's called glucose, or sugar. So the chemical formula is C6H12O6. That is glucose. So once our tree has glucose, a few different things can happen. The tree itself can use glucose and return it to the atmosphere through the process of respiration. Now you're probably like, respiration? I usually equate that with breathing. Trees breathe? Well, yeah, right? Anything living has a way to take sugar and release the energy. So that's what your tree is doing. Now, we also know, and maybe this doesn't happen with a tree and a bunny rabbit, should have probably picked a better animal, but your organisms eat plants. So I'll kind of use tree as a general plant. So how does a tree get to a bunny rabbit? Right? Normally we say they eat it. Let's think in technical terms. So that would be consumption. To consume, right? So when you eat, right, think of you as a bunny rabbit, when you have eaten food, you are gaining sugar. C6H12O6, right, again, that is your glucose. So now you have glucose stored inside of your stomach. So what can happen to it? On a daily basis, you're going to release that energy. You're going to use the energy and release it again, by respiration. Okay, so now we've made too many cycles. Went from the atmosphere to the tree, back to the atmosphere. That was one cycle. Then we went from the atmosphere to the tree, to the bunny rabbit, back to the atmosphere. The second cycle. All right, so let's go from the atmosphere to the tree, to the bunny rabbit. Now, everything doesn't live forever, So eventually, the bunny rabbit is going to be no more, and the bacteria are going to take over, right? So we would say that it's being decomposed. So we have decomposition. Right? That's the process of breaking down dead material. And again, bacteria are living things. So at the end of the day, what are they going to be releasing? They're going to also release carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere through, you guessed it, respiration. Right? Now, we have this stuff down here underground. Not everything is completely decomposed and broken down. Some things, the conditions are just right. And over millions and millions of years, right? This is not overnight, millions of years. Some organisms, typically trees and plants, okay, become fossil fuels. Right? So that's when they've been squished and squished and squished and squished for millions upon millions of years. You can't even tell that it's a fossil anymore, but we've made fuel out of fossils. Right? So it's another way to utilize energy. Now, if humans were not around, fossil fuels would literally be stuck in the ground forever and ever and ever. So we'll get back to that in a moment. Now, we haven't touched on the hydrosphere. The hydrosphere is any body of water. They relate with the carbon cycle because they do what's called gas exchange. Right? Carbon dioxide from the atmosphere can dissolve into the water and vice versa. So we have what's called gas exchange. Right. Now let's get our humans in here. Let's say we have a factory, right? Humans came in, built this factory up. All right. Now, what do factories need? Right? They're producing some energy for us. They're taking this fossil fuel that's been buried underground for millions of years, and they're drilling or mining, depending on the process. Right? So drill or mine. They're digging that up from underground and processing it and putting it back into the atmosphere as carbon dioxide. Right? So we have lots of carbon dioxide going into the atmosphere. It goes in from the water. It goes in from respiration by all living things. Right? And it goes in by human impact. Now, that's kind of odd because I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 arrows showing carbon dioxide going into the atmosphere. But I only have one way to take carbon out of the atmosphere. Right? So notice that photosynthesis is the only way for carbon dioxide to come out of the atmosphere. So we're going to get into a whole lot more detail about why are trees so important, and if we cut them down, how does that impact the carbon cycle? So hopefully you learned a little bit, got a little sneak peek of the carbon cycle, and we'll continue on very shortly.